Hey, DocSteve here, and right now it's late summer 2021, and all that's in the news right now is mask mandates, and especially school mask mandates. And I've learned some really interesting things about this. The first thing I've learned from some of these news items is that people on both sides of this issue really strongly believe that they have the truth in the matter. Makes me wonder why I should do a video about it, but I figure I gotta put my 2 cents out there because, quite frankly, this is an issue that could make a huge difference. One of the items I saw recently really illustrates this. There was a school board meeting. I don't like TV news all the time because a lot of times it goes for the sensational. I think most of our school board meetings are kind of yawners, but in this one, there were people yelling and screaming and threatening the school board members because they wanted to put in a mask mandate. And I'll tell you, the scene in the parking lot afterwards was frankly scary. There was yelling and screaming and life threats and police escorting the school board members off the property. And, it was scary. But it illustrated this fact because people don't play politics with their children's health. If they're yelling and screaming at school board members, it's because they really strongly believe that either masks are not helpful or they're actually dangerous, or probably both, right? At the same time, school board members are not going to try and put a mask mandate in at the threat of their lives just for the sake of politics. I mean, people don't do that. They really believe the mask mandate's going to protect their staff and their students. The second thing that's really interesting, and this is not so much learned from the news, but from my reading on the matter, is that people on both sides use the same data sometimes, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. The CDC came out with a study in March that they purported showed that mask mandates are effective in slowing the growth of COVID. In fact, their headline said, CDC study shows that mask mandates significantly reduce the rate of growth of COVID. However, within hours of it coming out, there were multiple headlines in some of the news sources that said, CDC study show that masks have only a negligible effect on COVID growth rates. So how can it be that both sides are using the same information? So I'm titling this video, Mask Effectiveness 0.5%? Because the CDC stated that these mask mandates decrease the rate of increase of COVID cases in an area by 0.5 percentage point at 3 weeks, by 1.5 percentage points at 6 weeks, and by around 2% at 10 weeks. Now, that sounds like it's a pretty low amount, but it's all in what does the 0.5 percentage point refer to. I have to dispense with a couple of things that were put out very early online and in some news sources that were frankly untrue and quite misleading. One of the networks, AON, had an item very early on that stated that this study showed that mask effectiveness was only 0.5%. In other words, the effectiveness of a physical item, a mask, was only 0.5% effective in preventing you from getting COVID or passing it to other people. This was not about mask effectiveness. They can't actually get a number for mask effectiveness from this study. It wasn't designed to do that. You could see that by reading the first page of the study. So the 0.5% is not talking about a number for mask effectiveness. The second thing that came out quite early, and this was one of the earliest interpretations of the study on Fox by one of the commentators there, but was spread all over online also shortly thereafter, is that the 0.5% is referring to the decrease in the caseload of COVID at about 3 weeks. In other words, there was only 0.5% decrease in the caseload of COVID 3 weeks out. Once again, this study wasn't trying to primarily answer that question. I will tell you that if you knew all the numbers, you could actually crunch them and find out what that percentage point is. And I tried to do that. You'll see later in this video. But that's not what the 0.5% was referring to. Both these interpretations are frankly quite misleading. And all it took was a quick look at the first page of the study to know that was the case. To be honest, you probably would have been smarter to ask your 10th grader to read the study and tell you what he or she thought it meant. Even if they only get C's in science, you probably would have been better off with that. By the way, I never got C's in science. I wouldn't be here if I got C's in science, but I would have gotten an F in phys ed if they ever gave Fs. I was not only the one that was picked last for team sports, I was the guy where they said, oh, you can have him too. So what exactly is the 0.5% talking about? I have to get graphic here because this is a hard thing to explain even to people who are math enabled. And I know some of you folks are math challenged, and that's going to be even harder for you. A little aside here, math challenged, it's a term I've used before in videos. I want to make sure everybody knows it's not an insult because guess what? Math challenged people are usually humanities enabled people, and humanities enabled people, well, they're a lot more interesting than most math enabled people. You know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. My wife knows what I'm talking about. I don't know how many times she said to me, Steve, can you stop doing math puzzles and read a book, or at least have a conversation with somebody about something that's interesting? She doesn't say it all the time. She hardly ever actually says that. She may not have ever actually said that, but I'm sure she thinks it. You do know what I'm talking about, okay? So math challenge, not an insult. So get back to the graphics. What is the 0.5% referring? So let's see what the difference between taking a 0.5% off of a growth rate and taking a 0.5 percentage point off a growth rate looks like. So starting with a growth rate of say 5% in an area, you subtract a 0.5% off of that. So a 0.5% of 5% is going to be 0.0025. And when you subtract that from the actual 5, what you get is 4.975, which is a really, really minor difference in growth rate. And it's true that with rates, results build up over time. Anybody who has a mortgage knows that that's true, but you're talking down the road, long term. It's not going to help in a pandemic. So that is truly negligible. However, the study didn't actually say that the mask mandates took only a 0.5% off the rate. It said it took a 0.5 percentage point off the rate. And let's see what that looks like. So you take a 0.5% off of 5% and you get 4.5%. That is actually a 10% decrease in the actual rate of COVID at 3 weeks. And don't forget, at 6 weeks, that's going to be down to 3.5%. And at 10 weeks, it's going to be down to just above 3%. You can see that it's a massive difference. And I actually crunched the number using a couple different growth rates to see what cases would be like at 3 and 6 weeks. And I found that in both cases, it was 20+% fewer cases, which is about 40 plus times better than what that Fox commentator that I talked about at the beginning. So huge difference. You know, the investigators in the study actually thought this was a more marked effect for mask mandates than they thought was going to actually happen. And several commentators said the same thing. They were surprised at how well the masks actually seemed to be working. Another thing that's really great about this study is it tests mask use in real life. There's been a lot made online about, well, maybe if people use them wrong, maybe if they touch them and touch their mouths, or maybe they use them too long, they use them for multiple days, that maybe they're more likely to get themselves infected. This doesn't test how people are supposed to use masks. It tests how people actually use them. And it finds out that, yeah, it actually works. It actually works pretty markedly. So this is the biggest and the best study done in this country during this pandemic about mask usage. And it shows that masks work moderately well. We already know they don't work great. I've said that in previous videos, but they work moderately well. And they work in real world usage. And that's the great thing about this study. I do want to say one more thing about this study, which is kind of unrelated to the study itself. I want to say this study is a very good example for why I don't like to get down on people for believing misinformation. I do want to get down on sources when they put out kind of completely ridiculous interpretations like those first two that I referred you to your 10th grader about. But I don't want to get down on people for believing this kind of more rational misinformation. You know, when I first read this 0.5% decrease in growth rates, that sounded negligible to me. Especially when it's coming from a source you trust. Who's not going to believe that? But it does bring us back to one of those critical things that I've mentioned before, and I'm going to beat this drum again. Folks, especially when things are so politicized, you got to fact check. This is a hard study to read. I don't expect people to read the study and understand what they're talking about. I'm used to reading studies, and it took me a while to get it. But it's easy to fact check. And I'm going to do a video on fact checking sometime soon. My next video, though, is going to be my last video on masks. And it's going to be about the side effects of masks, of which there are many. And I'm going to tell you about the 2 side effects that I routinely get. So you're going to get a chance to hear the sordid medical history of DocSteve. So see you next time. Thanks for watching. See ya. Bye.